So let's expand on one of those points, which I think is very important. And so Tim Walz signed a piece of legislation. And by the way, Washington, Oregon, and California have very similar laws. And these are called trans sanctuary state laws, where effectively it is medical kidnapping, where if you have a 14-year-old son or daughter that declares that they are a boy when they are biologically a girl, or vice versa, that the state has the ability to take possession and custody of your minor if you, as the parent, do not affirm the new gender that they might have learned at school or on TikTok. Is that correct, JD?
That's exactly right. And that's kidnapping, Charlie. That is legalized kidnapping. And if you're a Christian or just a person of conscience in this country, you ought to be telling the person who wants to do that, no way. We are not letting you anywhere near the halls of power. And that's what we have an opportunity to do. But it is so sick. I mean, think about this. Look, Charlie, I have an incredible amount of sympathy and compassion for some of these kids. I mean, you know, adolescence is confusing for almost every teenager, right? Every teenager goes through this or that thing. They go through an awkward phase. They maybe go through a goth phase. That was big when I was a kid in the 90s. Look, kids go through this stuff. But now we have social media going and telling them that, hey, you know, it's not just growing up or it's not just growing pains. You are in the wrong body. And you need to go mutilate yourself to feel like a whole person again. That's a terribly scary thing for a young teenager to go through. Tim Walz wants to take those kids away from their parents. I think we ought to encourage the parents to make those kids safe and to help them deal with whatever they're dealing with, not steal them away from the people who love them the most. It's sick, but it's not just sick, Charlie. It reveals an entire value set. You ask yourself, how could you be the governor of a state? Every protective instinct that I have as a father is if I'm in a position of leadership, I'm going to fight back against the people who are trying to burn down my city. Or I've got 3 little kids. I'm going to fight back against the people who are trying to take my children away from me because they got a weird idea in their head from social media. Or I'm going to fight back against the people who are stealing the jobs of American workers or making it unaffordable for young Americans to buy a home. Tim Walz, every single time he gets an opportunity, he fights for the people who are harming American citizens. We need a president who's going to fight for American citizens. We just don't have that right now in this country.
Amen. And just to expand on that, think about it. A kid goes through a phase and now is able to irreversibly damage him or herself without parental consent. There's a reason why you're not allowed to get a tattoo till you're 18 years old.
Right.
Because you might do something that you might regret. And yet now we call that gender-affirming care. Only President Trump and J.D. Vance stand for the children of this country against that horror that is happening to our children.
That's right.
So expanding on that, J.D., I see some of these signs out here, which is one of the 20 planks of the new Republican platform, which is no men in women's sports. It says it right there. Right there. JD, how did we get in a place where now this needs to be a policy position? And if Kamala Harris or Tim Walz took questions, maybe they'd have to answer for this. But they're okay with biological males competing in sports against females.
Yeah, which is, first of all, it's so unfair to the girls. Sometimes they've competed for their entire lives to reach the height of their particular sport. And then they have to, you've seen this in the swimming competitions or in the weightlifting competitions. They go up against a biological male who has advantages that are just so obvious, and it's insulting to these girls. But it's also dangerous for the girls. I mean, we of our 3 kids, we got 2 boys and a girl. I really don't want my 2-year-old to step into a competitive physical sport with a biological male because he might hurt her. And as a father, I believe that the job of fathers is to protect our daughters, not promote the people who are trying to harm them. And again, it just drives home how warped this value system is, right? Americans want very common sense things. They want their children to be able to afford to buy a home. They want good schools. They want safe streets. They want a closed border. Why are Kamala Harris and Tim Walz focused on forcing biological males to compete against our girls in sports? It's insane. And it's not just that, Charlie. So this came up in the state of Ohio, and when I first heard it, I didn't believe it. That the Harris administration was threatening local school districts. If they didn't go along with all of the gender and transgender craziness, they were going to take away free and reduced school lunch funding. That was the weapon. That was the weapon that they were using. If you want your free and reduced lunch funding, then you need to do what we want you to do on the transgender stuff. What kind of a human being would be willing to take food out of the mouths of poor children because the local school district doesn't buy into Kamala Harris's values? That is really sick, and we don't need to be led by people like that. We need to be led by people who support American values, who, when a local school district says, we don't want Kamala Harris's values in our school district, let's make it easier for them to live their values and easier for them to protect their children, not steal money from poor kids because we want to force something down their throat.
I love it. I want to get